All right, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us here this morning, both in person and via live stream, for a conversation with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy R. Sherman, Technology and the Future of Foreign Policy. My name is Danny Hoffman. I am the Interim Director of the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies here at the University of Washington. Now, it's really an honor for us here at the Jackson School to host our distinguished guests, the Honorable Wendy R. Sherman, Deputy Secretary of State in the United States, the Honorable Nathaniel C. Fick, Ambassador at Large for Cyberspace and Digital Policy, and the Honorable Jessica A. Lewis, Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs. Now, of course, it's also, I think, for us a real honor to be able to host so many students, faculty members, and administrators from here at the University of Washington. For an event that really highlights what the kind of engaged and informed public discourse that we take such pride in at the Jackson School. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. Now, before we begin the program, I'd like to note, as we always do at our public events, that the Jackson School of International Studies acknowledges that we are on Coast Salish territory, the traditional homelands of the Duwamish, the Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and other indigenous peoples. The Jackson School understands that the international community includes sovereign American Indian tribes, First Nations, and indigenous peoples across the world. So with that, and in the interest of speeding this along, I would like to hand this over to my friend and colleague, Sara Curran, who will be our faculty moderator for today's event.
Thank you, Danny. I think I'll stand for a second. And I'm really honored to be here. I'm Sara Curran, Professor of International Studies at the Jackson School. I also want to acknowledge that I'm also the daughter of a Foreign Service officer and know well what it takes for us to have this honor of having the Deputy Secretary here. Where I lived around the world, we rarely got to see the Deputy Secretary, so it's really a wonderful honor to have her here. I'm going to also want to thank the entire team that brought her here and had her here. We had a huge team effort on the Secretary's side, the Department of State side, as well as the University of Washington side. So thank you to the entire team. Particularly thank you to my colleague and co-director of the Cybersecurity Initiative, Dr. Jessica Beyer, who's in the background and whose students are in the audience. I just want to quickly introduce our Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, who was sworn in as the 21st and first female Deputy Secretary of State. This is a huge job. Think of it as the COO of an organization. And imagine having an organization that has representation in every country of the world, practically. So it's a giant job. And she was a professor of practice of public leadership and director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. She was also a senior fellow at the school's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs and a senior counselor at the Albright Stonebridge Group. From 2011 to 2015, Deputy Secretary Sherman served as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, where she traveled to 54 countries and led the U.S. negotiating team that reached agreement on the JCPOA. So for those of you who know what that means, that's an incredible accomplishment. And for that, she was awarded the National Security Medal by President Barack Obama. Previously, she served as counselor under Secretary Madeleine Albright and as special advisor to President Clinton and policy coordinator on North Korea. So she's had no shortage of challenging and remarkably important roles in our foreign affairs in the United States. We also have with us today Ambassador at Large Nathaniel Fick, who is the first inaugural U.S. Ambassador at Large for Cyberspace and Digital Policy. Prior to joining the State Department, Ambassador Fick was a technology executive and entrepreneur. He was CEO of the cybersecurity software company Endgame from 2012 through its acquisition by Elastic in 2019. And thereafter, he led Elastic's information security business globally. He told me just now that he's also served on the board of universities and knows well the challenges that our universities face with regards to cybersecurity. So I mentioned that we have some representatives from our CISO office here, so I know they may have some questions as well. From 2009 to 2012, Ambassador Fick was CEO of the Center for a New American Security, a national security research organization in Washington. We're really delighted that they're both here to offer, the Deputy Secretary will offer a few remarks, and then we will open the floor to questions. Before I hand this over, I'd like to also acknowledge several of the Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs here, Jessica. Yeah, Jessica will, I can't. And so happy she's here too. So let's begin with Deputy Secretary of State's Wendy Sherman's remarks.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm going to be brief because I really want to get to the conversation with you. So Dean Hoffman, Dr. Curran, thank you for hosting me today. It's really an honor to be here with you and with all the students and faculty who are here. And with our new ambassador at large for cyberspace and digital policy, Nate Fick, who's been on the job all of a month, has been to the West Coast twice, been to Singapore, and sort of tried to find his way into the building. Never easy at the State Department. And of course, the most important people here, all of the students, as well as those watching online. As was noted, before I came back into government, I was teaching at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And painfully, Ash Carter, the former Secretary of Defense, who was a colleague at the Kennedy School, passed away suddenly. He was a great leader in science and technology, and I'm sure many of you know him and feel the loss as I do this week. Whenever I'm on a college campus or meeting with students, I do feel my inner professor coming out. So I'm going to start by giving you an assignment, but it's not hard. It's an easy one. I want all of you, especially the young women among you, to start thinking about what question you want to ask us or what comment you want to make, because I truly want this to be a conversation. Now, I say especially the young women because often when I'm in front of audiences, women are slow to raise their hands. They think they need to have a perfect question or perfect comment ready. Just do what the guys do, raise your hand. They have no idea what they're going to ask or say. But they raise their hands anyway because they figure by the time they're called on, they'll say something and they'll do it with enough confidence that I'll think it's very smart. So just do the same thing. Most of all, I want to hear what's on your minds, what you're thinking about, what you hope to see, what your ideas are, because with my white hair, I'm the past. You all are the future. You all are the future. It's great to be back in Seattle, a long-standing hub of American innovation, from business to music to technology. 60 years ago, and I was there as a 13-year-old at the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, a new invention made its debut. They called it, quote, space-age cordless telephone. It was the first time the monorail ran as well. And it was designed to dazzle diners at the rotating restaurant at the top of the Space Needle, which I also went to. People were amazed. Not only could they witness 360-degree views of the gorgeous mountains and coastline without moving a muscle, they could also brag to their friends about it on the phone without tangled cords getting in the way. Over my lifetime, I've watched the concept of a cordless phone evolve from a novelty to an expensive status symbol to a foundational technology that people all over the world rely on to live their lives. Even in the least developed parts of the world, people use their cell phones for everything from banking to predicting crop yields. By historical standards, this change was fast. The printing press took centuries to go global, but it still spanned most of my adult life and generations of devices most of you have probably never heard of. In the coming years, new and emerging technologies carry the potential to change our world on a much shorter timeline. 5G just launched 6 years ago, just 6 years ago, and it has already reshaped the world's communications network architecture. Other new and emerging technologies, particularly in the fields of advanced computing, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology, all carry the potential to transform the world, not just technologically, not just economically, but politically and geostrategically as well. That's because we are living in an era of renewed great power competition. 2 weeks ago, President Biden laid out his foreign policy vision in the new national security strategy. I'll quote from the opening. Quote, the post-Cold War era is definitely over. And competition is underway between the major powers to shape what comes next. Competition to develop and deploy foundational technologies that will transform our security and economy is intensifying, unquote. As Secretary Blinken put it at Stanford last week, a big part of the upcoming competition between major powers is going to be driven by technology. It's clear that new technologies are reshaping how we live, how we work, and how we learn. Advances in clean energy are changing how we power our economies. New climate-smart agricultural practices are shifting how farmers grow food and cope with extreme weather, like lots of rain and little sunshine. Biotechnology is uncovering new medical advances and new methods of manufacturing them. The internet is enabling new ways of advancing research, of sharing knowledge, and of bringing us together. But we've also seen new technologies used for darker purposes as well. We've seen authoritarian leaders use surveillance technologies to crack down on dissent and suppress critical voices. We've witnessed the power of social media exploited to spread disinformation and lies, to sow distrust and division, even to encourage acts of violence. To take a practical example, just look at what's going on in Iran right now. Protests sparked by the tragic and senseless death of Mahsa Amini. Today is day 40, which in Iranian world is an anniversary of this tragic event. In the custody of the so-called morality police, those protests have spread to every major city across the country, and in her home city, thousands protested today. The knee-jerk reaction of the Iranian authorities was not to listen, not to apologize. Instead, it was to shut down the internet, spread disinformation, and block apps that millions of Iranians rely on to connect with each other and to sustain their livelihoods. Technology, for all of us, is a means, not an end, a tool, not a destination. Technology can be used to lift people up or keep them down. We cannot take for granted that improvements in technology will lead to improvements in our lives. We must prepare for the risks. When I was sworn in as Deputy Secretary of State about 18 months ago, seems like about a decade, one of the first things Secretary Blinken asked me to do was to co-lead a comprehensive review of our cyber and emerging technology strategy at the State Department. Just about everyone recognized that the United States urgently needed to strengthen our global leadership on cybersecurity, digital policy, and emerging technology. As a result of that work, we launched a new Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy in April. We did this to significantly increase our capacity to address the cyberspace and digital issues facing the United States and other countries, to integrate the economic, security, and values components of cyberspace, and to deepen our pool of expertise so we can engage partners around the world on these issues. I am so thrilled to have the head of that new bureau, Ambassador Nate Fick, here with us today. I'm so thrilled he came because that meant he could take the lead on this, no longer an ignorant Deputy Secretary of State, though Nate will continue to collaborate with my office, at least in this first year as we figure this all out. Nate is the United States' first ever ambassador at large for cyberspace and digital policy. And as I noted, he's been keeping a busy schedule, his second trip to the West Coast in as many weeks, and he managed to stop in Singapore in between. As we heard, he's a diplomat, but also a technology expert, an entrepreneur, executive, with combat experience as well as a Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan for good measure. And I know your dad served as the DCM in Afghanistan, one of the easier posts we have. Nate personifies what our country needs to be competitive in the face of the foreign policy challenges that lie ahead. A deep understanding of the interconnectedness between technology, national security, economic competitiveness, and democracy. And that brings me to the heart of what I want to say to you today. Whether you are studying international affairs or biotechnology, cybersecurity, or law, you too will need to understand these connections. I'm very grateful to be speaking with an audience of students and faculty representing a wide range of fields from social sciences to STEM. For those of you studying one of the social sciences, I hope you'll consider a career in public service, maybe even at the State Department. I did, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. The work is interesting. The work is rewarding. The work is hard, really hard, but it's meaningful. And it gives you an opportunity to improve the lives of the American people and of people all over the world. But I'd also encourage those in social sciences, that was me when I was you, to take a STEM class, or even a few, or find another way to get smart about new and emerging technologies. You might not get your best grades, I certainly didn't, but I promise you it will be worth it, because we need our current and future policymakers, most of whom don't have STEM backgrounds, to understand enough about technology to be persuasive and effective in their jobs. For those of you who are studying STEM fields, I hope you too will consider a career in public service, even at the State Department. There is no question we need STEM expertise in the government, and particularly at the Department of State. Jessica can tell you all about that in the political military arena. And we are expanding opportunities to hire people who have academic backgrounds like you, including for Nate's team. I'm looking at the cybersecurity students in this room. I'm looking at all of you. But even if you don't end up in government, there are other ways to contribute to our national security, to our economic competitiveness, and fundamentally to our democracy. One of those ways is to understand the broader context in which new technologies are being developed, to take some classes on international relations and political economy. Another is to train and work on issues that are central to our national security. Right now, that includes semiconductors, biotechnology, and quantum information service science. In a few years, who knows what it will be? Nate and I were at T-Mobile yesterday asking, so what the heck will 6G really be? You can be part of shaping that world, because it comes down to this. It's up to us, all of us, to build the future of cyberspace and technology we want to see. Policymakers and engineers, cybersecurity experts and lawyers, all of us expanding our horizons, all of us listening to and learning from each other, all of us seeing the connections between technology and economic development and foreign policy. This is how we ensure technology reflects our democratic values and lifts up people and societies. This is how we make sure the technology of the future is a force for good. So thank you again for being here today. For all of those who have tuned in, Ambassador Fick and I look forward to taking your questions. Jessica can join us too if you want to know about the world of political military affairs. So thank you all for having us here today. Thanks so much.
Some ideas about how students might advice you might give students. But maybe we get a little bit more specific and ask you, what kind of advice would you offer those in the audience who would like to work for the State Department or work in international affairs? What would be a next step that they might take?
So there's several ways you can do this. You can join the Foreign Service. You have to take an exam. You have to talk to people. We've tried to change the process so that it is more open, so that we get the diverse workforce that we must have. DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is a high priority for Secretary Blinken. To modernize the State Department, some of you have had challenges approaching the State Department. We're not always the most approachable, but we're trying to become better at that, recruiting people into the Foreign Service. We also have a mid-career program where people may have gone out and worked in the private sector, worked in an NGO, decide they want to bring, or in science, decide they want to bring their talents into the State Department. So there is a mid-career level in which you can come in, not have to start at the very bottom, but make use of your great talent. You can come in as a civil servant. And a lot of our folks who work in science and technology come in through the civil service because they're bringing in specific career abilities and technologies. We're trying to open up more of an opportunity for our civil servants to go abroad, but not have the same requirements that the Foreign Service has, because when you're in the Foreign Service, you have to go someplace new every 3 years. In some ways, that's very exciting, and you never get bored. The other way, it's harder if you want to raise a family to keep moving around the world the whole time. You understand this quite personally. And then there's a third way to work at the State Department, which is the way I came into the State Department. I have been trained as a social worker. I have a master's in social work. I was trained as a community organizer and a clinician. I always joke my clinical skills have been very helpful with dictators and members of Congress. And I never expected to have a career in national security and foreign policy. When President Clinton was going to be president, some folks who knew of some work I had done in politics, because I ended up going from child welfare to politics, suggested that I might be a good Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs, helping to advance what we did up on Capitol Hill. So I ended up for Warren Christopher, who became Secretary of State, becoming Assistant Secretary. Then I went back out into the private sector and then became Madeleine Albright's counselor. She and I had known each other a long time. Then I went out and built a business with her in the private sector, a global consulting company. Did that for a long time, and then came back in for Secretary Clinton and Secretary Kerry to be the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. Went back out to the Kennedy School and came back in. So there are all kinds of routes, but my main message to you all, and there are other places in government you could come in as well, lots of places. But what I want to say to you more than anything is that we have to bring all these worlds together. Because if we don't take a holistic approach to the future with science and technology and the social sciences, we will not win the future. We will not win the vision for a democratic future. That's my major message. Now, Nate, you may want to, Nate's come in as a political appointee, but he obviously started out in the military, also a route into government service.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Sherman, and thanks, Professor Curran and Professor Hoffman. Really, sitting in a room surrounded by books is kind of my happy place. I think I could have had a very happy parallel life in the academy, and so it's great to be on a university campus. And I would just emphasize something the Deputy Secretary said, which is, I remember sitting in your seats when I was 18, 19, 23, 25, and thinking about public service as a binary choice. But it isn't. And I think that each of us is increasingly a free agent in his or her own career. The old 20-year and a gold watch model is gone. And there are costs and benefits of that change, but one of the benefits is, I think our appeal to you is not come give us 40 years of public service. It can be 4 years or it can be 2 years. I would just encourage you, especially in the technology space, some of the most valuable people that we can bring onto our team are people who weave between the two worlds over the whole arc of their career, who can help bring some of that innovative dynamism of the tech sector into government, but also bring some of the principles and global perspective from government back to the technology sector. So don't think of it as a binary choice. Think of it as a building block or an element that can be a piece of your overall career.
Really wise advice. Thank you both. I had one more question, but I'm going to hold off because I want to turn it to the students. And we have several students that we've handpicked with questions. So those of you who do take the advice of the Deputy Secretary and get ready for your chance to ask a question. But I'm going to turn to Katie Gonser, one of our PhD students. And please, when you reintroduce yourself and tell the Deputy Secretary and the Ambassador a little bit about yourself before asking your question.
You have to stand up.
Stand up. So we have a camera in the back here too. So.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to have you. My name is Katie. I'm a PhD candidate here at Jackson School.
You know what I'm going to
Here,
do?
I'll do it.
I'm going to give Katie a microphone. There you go.
Okay. So since 2020, I've been working on a research project with Drs. Sara Curran and Jessica Bayer. It's on COVID-related disinformation on Twitter. And so I wanted to ask you about foreign disinformation campaigns. So we know that Russia and now China are leading these global disinformation campaigns to influence elections, to shape narratives about COVID, and now about the war in Ukraine. And so I wanted to ask what the US government is doing to counter these efforts, and also whether there's any collaboration with foreign governments because it's such a global issue. Thank you.
Yes and yes. This is a huge problem. Huge. Thank you for doing your research. Please send us all of your results. Please send us all of your thinking. I say that to everybody in this room. My email address, I mean this seriously, my email address is shermanwr@state.gov. It's not a secret, and people find their way to me in all kinds of ways. But if you have research that you're doing on disinformation and you think you have some ideas about how to disaggregate what's going on and therefore how to address it, please send it our way. We have a global engagement section of our public diplomacy arena that tries to track and do research and elevate and unveil what is going on so that we can better address it. Part of Nate's work will be in the ICT arena trying to unpack some of that and what's going on. We work across government on disinformation because we obviously have a very vibrant intelligence community, which brings us a lot of information and insight into what's going on and try to close down what we can close down. We try to make Americans and the rest of the world aware of what's going on. I came here yesterday. I got to do 2 Wednesdays, one in Tokyo, and then I got here and did Wednesday again. And in Tokyo, in meeting with my Japanese and Korean counterparts, we talked a lot about our shared efforts in this regard. I think the other piece of this is yesterday we met, Nate and I and others, with Mayor Harrell, who is bringing together technology companies here for the purposes of the interests of the city of Seattle. He's also working with other mayors across the country. And so we said to him, you know, this is an area where you can be helpful to our national security and foreign policy, to see what further the technology companies working with the academic community here in Seattle can help us to deal with this. We have this disinformation problem in our own country, so we can use it as a laboratory without having to go abroad. But what's happening around the world is of enormous concern. and is causing enormous issues. But I'm going to let the person who really understands how this all comes together comment.
I'm happy to elaborate a little bit. Thanks, Katie. And I'll just make 3 points on this. The first is we're obviously in the middle of an era of the digitization of everything. And I think the basic currency of our digital future is trust. And so our shared task is to maintain a basic level of digital trust, or a basic level of trust in the digital ecosystem. I don't think it's hyperbolic to say without that basic level of trust, democracies don't function. And that is a simple proposition, but it's still a pretty radical proposition, and it's a case that we need to make. My second point is we can't do it alone. However you define we. We, the Bureau, we, the State Department, we, the United States, can't do it alone. So a priority for me just in my first month has been meeting with my counterparts around the world to try to help galvanize, and there's a lot of work already underway to do this, believe me, to galvanize groups of us who can be advocates for the same position. That includes the private sector. I came here this morning after a conversation at Microsoft about this exactly, and the role that big companies can play, and in fact need to play. And then third, and this gets to the conversation we had with the mayor yesterday, I think there's an element here for sub-national diplomacy. It's almost a public education campaign. We did it effectively with smoking. We did it effectively with seatbelts. Why can we not do it effectively with savvy consumption of online information? And that's not to put it entirely on the consumer. I think that we are dealing with business models and algorithms that are purposely tuned in a way here that is not helpful. And we're dealing with digital platforms that are being weaponized by our adversaries, by foreign intelligence services. I talk to my kids all the time about this. I have 2 middle school girls. And so it's front and center in I think, in all of our lives. And it is, I think it's one of the issues of our time. And it's something that's going to take broad-based collaboration to solve. I'm confident we're going to get there, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. We do have a follow-up question somewhat to that, Casper.
My name is Casper. I'm an economics and international studies major focusing on the Asia Pacific. My question is somewhat of a follow-up to the previous question. I'm wondering how the United States, and for that matter, other democratic nations across the globe, might remain competitive in combating disinformation and other information-related threats, while simultaneously maintaining the integrity of their free speech protections, and in whether, in your view, there is an inherent trade-off between these two priorities. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think it's a good great philosophical starting point. I come down on the side of freedom and free speech and open platforms and inclusivity first and foremost. I don't think any of the measures that we're talking about should impinge upon global free speech. I don't think they need to impinge upon our ability to maintain our competitive edge, innovative edge, technologically and economically globally. I also think that there are limits for the sake of public good. It's the proverbial, yelling fire in a theater is not protected speech. And so weaponizing these platforms to spread blatantly false, misleading, dangerous information should not be protected speech. And there's a gray area on the edges. And I guess I generally subscribe to Winston Churchill's view on this, that I trust the United States and the American people to do the right thing sometimes after exhausting all the alternatives. There's going to be a messy democratic tug of war to figure out where that line is. But if we're going to reach a durable consensus on it, and that's what we need not just a consensus, we need a durable consensus that will sustain us even when the going gets tough. There's no shortcut to get to that. So that's going to involve a long period, I think, of public debate.
The only thing I'd add to that, because I generally agree with Nate, is this is something countries are grappling with all over the world, not just us, and so we're grappling with them. And we have put out a call for an alliance on the internet on a set of principles and norms, and I think creating normative behavior is something that we can do without having to make sure that everybody passes the same law, because there are sort of different cultural differences in some places. And I don't mean cultural differences, it's okay to surveil all of your citizens and own all their data. I mean cultural differences in how much personal freedom we and Europe, who are our very closest allies, have a different view about personal freedom and privacy. London has, even in the world of crime, as I know you're debating here in Seattle, London has cameras everywhere on the street, everywhere. That probably wouldn't be tolerated in most American cities, though we've sort of creeped down that road further than I think some Americans believe we would have. So these are debates we need to have, but there is this ground, I think, that is sacrosanct for us, and we should fight for it. And if we don't establish those norms, particularly outside of the world of military conflict, then we will live in a world. I'm past having middle schoolers. I now have grandsons. And I know what kind of a world I want them to grow up in.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Mitchell. And it's something of a follow-up.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Levy, and I am a computer science and math major here at the UW. I'm an undergrad. And my question is, as cybersecurity becomes increasingly integrated into foreign policy, how can we craft processes and customs to make interaction around cybersecurity norms and international internet governance productive, particularly considering the tensions between actors such as the United States, China, and Russia?
Well, I'll start and then hand it over to Nate. We're probably not going to agree with Russia and China. We're probably not going to come to common cause on this world, even though the UN did reach a set of norms on actions below the level of conflict. So it doesn't mean we all are going to live by those. Everybody's going to live by the norms that got created. But that exercise is critical nonetheless, because it moves the world at least in a direction. But China and Russia, we've seen what Vladimir Putin's choices have been, which is to throw out the window the UN charter that he ostensibly subscribes to and invade a sovereign country, which we thought we were sort of past that time in history, but clearly he decided we are not. And Xi Jinping, who now has complete control of his country, for a long time now, we know, has believed that cyberspace and the digital world should be used for his purposes, and not necessarily for purposes that give every country the ability to rise in the world. So China grew because of a rules-based international order that allowed China to rise, and now it sort of wants to throw that out and set its own set of rules. But the rest of the world, we have to work hard at this. And we all have to remember that most of the world's people do not have the tools we have. And they have differential abilities. So if you are in some countries in Africa, your cell phone is everything, if you're lucky enough to have one. Everything. Everything you do is on your cell phone because there is no bank to go to. Your transactions are on your phone. You care about the security then in a different way. Your whole life is there. And for people your generation, I think pretty much your whole life is there too. I don't have Venmo because I worry about security. But most of my colleagues who are young, they don't use a dollar bill anymore. They don't carry any cash. So we all are going to have to think through a lot of change as we try to create norms that the world can live with.
Thank you. So my first week on the job was in Bucharest, supporting campaigning for Doreen Bogdan-Martin to be Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union. And the ITU is the oldest international forum of its kind. It was started in 1865 with the mission of making sure that European telegraphs could talk to American telegraphs, could talk to Asian telegraphs, which is one of those foundational things that you, as a private citizen, generally don't think about. But that stuff doesn't just happen, right? It requires an enormous amount of work and coordination. So I agree with the proposition that this focus on standards and norms is really important. And Doreen's landslide election to lead the ITU for the next 4 years matters a lot. One of my last acts as a private citizen before coming into government was to co-chair Council on Foreign Relations Task Force on Cybersecurity. And one of the propositions that we made on the task force was to say that norms are incredibly useful. However, they are more useful in binding together like-minded parties than they are in persuading our adversaries. So they're necessary but not sufficient. And all of the multilateral processes that exist to develop, and I'll get back to that term durable consensus because I think it really matters, the group of government experts, the open-ended working group, this work that culminated in a framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace is no small achievement, right? Every UN member state signed on to that. It's a huge accomplishment. It's a great foundation from which to build. And the Chinese and the Russians are generally not going to abide by it. So that's all on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that something that we need to work with our allies and partners to do is to extend all of the mechanisms of deterrence into this digital world to ensure that there are consequences, clear, measurable, largely reversible consequences for misbehavior, for violation of norms in the digital domain. And that is a large focus of what we're now working on.
Thank you. We have one more prepared question from Levy. Yeah. And it's a follow-on.
Hi there. My name is Levi Howard, and I'm a global studies major here at UW, focusing on cybersecurity, Eastern Europe, and Russia. And my question for you is, how should the international community think about cyber attacks versus kinetic attacks? And kind of going off of that, should cyber attacks be treated as kinetic attacks in terms of response and consequences?
The guy who's been in the military and in
So one of my favorite sayings is history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think that applies here to this idea of how to treat cyber attacks relative to kinetic attacks. One of the deputy secretary and the late Ash Carter's colleagues at Harvard is Professor Joe Nye, who's done a lot of work on whether the lessons of nuclear deterrence really apply in the cyber domain. And the answer is, or the answer that he comes to is sort of. So it's really history rhyming but not repeating. And I am of the view that the deterrent umbrella extended by the United States to support a rules-based international order since the end of World War II in Europe and in Asia primarily has generally been a force for good, for stability and prosperity. And now as we are in this era that's extending every aspect of our lives into the digital domain, we need to develop the declaratory and escalatory frameworks to make sure that our adversaries understand that there are going to be consequences for misbehavior in the cyber domain. And they might not just be cyber consequences. It's not going to be cyber tit for cyber tat. It's going to be the extension of every aspect of our national power, diplomatic, informational, economic, in some cases military. I can absolutely envision cases where cyber attacks have effects in the world that justify a military response. And our adversaries need to know that. not because we want to go to war, but because we want to keep the peace.
So a few other pieces of this puzzle that some of you may be working on. We've talked about kinetic activity. We've talked about cyberspace. But the future is also going to belong to space and what happens in space and how all of these pieces come together. There may be some of you in this audience who are looking at the space domain, which I think will become more and more and more critical. We heard a Russian official just yesterday, I guess, talk about how attacking US satellites in space that might be helping to help the Ukrainians find targets on the ground can be subject to attack by Russia. This is really dangerous, folks. Understanding how all of these domains will interact into the future will take leaps and bounds that I certainly don't understand when it comes to AI and to quantum. Before Putin made this decision for this unprovoked, premeditated, and horrifying invasion of sovereign territory, I led our delegation to meet with the Russians in what we called the Strategic Stability Dialogue. And we had two very good discussions before all of this happened. And in one of them, we had a very useful discussion about a norm we might agree to put in place, which is that no autonomous weapon should ever be launched, quote unquote, autonomous weapon, without a human hand. So just think about that. If you don't have a human being involved in the decision-making around launching a weapon in an age of artificial intelligence, what would that mean for us? So we had an informal agreement on that, which I'd hoped in the next round to make a formal agreement with the Russians, because it would be important for the future. The next one we had was what we called the special SSD in an effort to keep Putin from going to the war he'd already decided to launch. And now we're absolutely nowhere. And all of these domains that we talk about, we have to understand where they interconnect, what new norms we need for them. But I'd urge you all, for those of you who are looking at cyberspace, to also look at space, because of course, those satellites that are up there now control so much of what we do in our world, make it possible for us to do so much in our world. And they are now, according to the Russians, potential targets. Just to give you something, upbeat and optimistic to think about.
All right, the floor is open. I do want to ask some of our women if they have a question.
Oh, come on.
Izzy, we got Izzy.
Thank you. Why don't you come on up so you have a microphone?
Thank you. And introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Isabel Wilson. I'm an undergraduate studying international studies in Spanish, and I'm also fortunate enough to be doing research under Dr. Jessica Beyer. And kind of bouncing off of the topic of satellites, I'm really interested in the connection between private companies and the public sphere. And as a young person who's on the internet a lot, I've noticed in recent years, there's a lot of call from the public for private companies to take actions on national security issues, such as having Elon Musk move satellites to help Ukraine, or the recent violence in Iran. And so I just wanted your thoughts on if you think this call from the public for private companies to take action on national security issues is a good thing, or if you think it could cause problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Izzy.
Thanks, Isabel. I I think the simple answer to your question, if there is a simple answer, is both. There are private companies that have the capability, scale, and depth. They're almost state-like in their ability to engage around the world. That provides both a useful ally, right, and an actor that's not necessarily bound by the same norms that govern how states behave. So I think it's part of this brave new world that we're in, and it's something that we need to figure out. And we're not there yet, because companies, like countries, fall across a spectrum of behavior. One thing that I'll say is certain is that our bureau, and I think the government more broadly, recognize that we have to engage more closely with the private sector, and that's in every sense. It's threat information sharing in cybersecurity, it's finding creative pathways for people to come spend a year or two with us, and us to put people in companies for a year or two. It's regular dialogue. I mean, the majority of our conversations here have been with private companies. The majority of my conversations last week, a few hundred miles south of here, were with private companies. We can't succeed as a government, as a nation, in the digital era without close collaboration with our private sector economy.
So just to go to your examples, Izzy, I met virtually with companies just a few days ago who I wanted to make sure they knew that we had, working with our Treasury Department, issued a general license so that if they provided technology or VPNs to the protesters in Iran, they would not be sanctioned by the US government, that this would be outside of the sanctions that we have on Iran, which are many and very difficult to know whether you're going to run afoul of them or not. So it was to advertise to them quite publicly, go forth. If you want to help them, and know you're not going to get in trouble, that this general license will cover your actions. And in situations like that, we have to do that just in the same way that we do general license to make sure that humanitarian aid can go into a country that we might otherwise sanction for many, many, many reasons. So we want to make sure that things like food and medicine are never sanctioned by us, that we never undermine humanitarian need or the ability for people to freely express themselves. And so we will offer those general licenses or specific to a situation, not to tell companies they must, but to give them a permission slip that they're not going to get in trouble with the government if they do. And so therefore, we are in essence saying, go forth.
Yeah, I have a question. Yep. Can you stand up and introduce yourself? And the mic, yeah.
All right. Hi, I'm Benjamin. I'm a fifth-year student studying informatics and psychology, and I'm an international student from Singapore, so I hope you enjoyed your trip there. And just a question, because of me being somebody with working in technology or intending to work in technology and with friends from all over the world who want to work in it. My question is, as the world starts to polarize towards authoritarianism and democracy, there are many skilled technology workers who are studying here in the US who face an unenviable choice: to seek to work with freer nations to advocate for protection of rights, or be forced back by draconian laws to working to deconstructing such freedoms. However, these choices come with a backdrop of increasing anti-immigrant rhetoric from freer nations such as the US. So how is the US and the State Department working to convince and protect international technology workers who seek to work in freer nations in this new global war for technology talent? Thank you.
Great question, and it follows up from a meeting that I just had with AAPI students and colleagues here who have faced discrimination, either coming into the State Department, doing research here in the United States, the concerns people have that some technologists and experts and researchers, particularly from China, can no longer come here. And in strategic fields, that is a very big challenge. We are working really hard to make sure that people from diverse backgrounds feel that they have a place at the Department of State, that they can serve worldwide, that we get rid of some of the age-old restrictions that have occurred in the State Department around these issues, that we use technology so that people can talk with each other. One of the things we all learned in the pandemic when we were doing the Afghanistan withdrawal, every single day I had a VTC with 30 countries around the world every single day for weeks. I could never have done that if we had not been able to do it virtually. So we're finding new techniques and ways to share information and move that forward. I can't make difficult decisions for people who would love to return to their country and continue to their research, but are fearful of what that means for their future, and whose families may be back there and have to make very tough choices. Those are very, very, very tough choices. I believe that we should and we do have visa potentials for those who are bringing specific skill sets to the United States to bring them and their families here. Not easy, but possible. But I appreciate it is a challenging environment of which you speak.
I will add maybe two points. The first is a foundational principle of what we're doing in the Bureau is recognizing that we can't do it alone in the world. And that requires like-minded partners and allies all over the world. Singapore is clearly one of them. And I would give a huge plug to David Koh, my counterpart in Singapore, running the Singapore Cybersecurity Authority, who has built an incredible team and is doing phenomenal work. For the United States, just a plug for diversity, and I'll give you the CEO's perspective here, if I can put on my old hat. We've spent billions of dollars on cybersecurity every year, and yet every enterprise of any size is breached. So clearly something's not working. The definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expect different results. We need different perspectives at the table. We have to approach this problem differently because the old ways didn't work. They were inadequate. So we do need broad, diverse, different perspectives working on these problems. I want to be able to fish in the entire sea of talent, which means we need to have a workforce that is reflective of the entire sea of talent and a culture that makes anyone feel comfortable and believe that he or she can contribute. And so those are a couple of points that we're working to make real.
All right, I've signaled in that we have time for one more question, and I've got you in the back because frequently. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
You can do it. I know you can.
I can walk straight, I guess, for now. Let's see. Well, thanks for coming. I am a professor in political science. I work on innovation. I research it and teach about innovation.
What's your name?
Victor Minaldo. My question is on the trade-offs involved with President Biden's national security strategy. I completely understand the motivation for it. I get that we're in a new world, but obviously there are trade-offs to everything. I'm going to speak about one of the trade-offs, but I don't expect you guys to go on the record to say anything about that. You might elaborate on other trade-offs. The trade-off I fear when it comes to the international supply chain for advanced chips, microprocessors, you might think of AI or you might think of cloud computing processors. I fear that in isolating China, and I get why we're doing it with the export controls when it comes to their chip industry, they're going to have to, from scratch, create a vertically integrated supply chain on their own, which is one of the most formidable challenges they'll ever face in their history. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're able to pull it off. And in a sense, I'm worried that we've forced them into a corner where they might not rely on the international supply chain any longer the way they do now. So I'm thinking about TSMC in Taiwan. And I worry about the reduction of the deterrent effect that has. And I'm sure you guys are thinking about this. Once you're not plugged into the international trading system as much, or international investment flows and what have you, or the international supply chain, if you're not dependent on that, then you're not deterred as much about attacking it or having it come under threat. So that's the trade-off I worry about. I'm not going to ask you to talk about Taiwan policy because I don't expect you to do that here. It doesn't make sense. But are there other trade-offs keeping you guys up at night? Because that one really worries me a lot, and it worries other people too in this space.
Thank you, Victor.
So thank you. Let me just say, I live in a world, we all live in a world where we wish some things were not the way they are, but they are. I yearn for the 90s when we thought we could have a strong relationship with the People's Republic of China, strong relationship with Russia. We wouldn't always agree on things, but we could work together for the betterment of the world. Incredibly painfully, that's not where we are right now. I wish it were otherwise. It's not. And so on the decision we made about the export control decision that we recently made, it was absolutely positively, as you pointed out, necessary. I think we have many other tools in our toolbox to address the concern that you raised. I am not going to talk about those tools here and where we are headed on policy and on actions, but we have many tools in our toolbox, and we are aware of what the future might bring and how we can shape that. And when Secretary Blinken gave really the seminal speech on our policy towards the PRC last May, he said there were three elements. One was to invest in our own country, which is part of the reason we're here in Seattle, because you all are so critical to those investments. And that means investing in the semiconductor supply chain, upstream, fabs, downstream, all of it, and doing so in our own country and with like-minded countries so that we have resilience throughout the like-minded world. Second, that we align with others so that there are the force multiplier for the world that we are hoping for, because we have a vision of the future that is different than Xi Jinping's vision of the future. And we want our vision to prevail because it gives people individual choice and countries greater freedom to express who they are and their own identity. And then the third part of that is to compete, because we must. That is where we are in this world. And quite frankly, that's where we are, in everything we do. We compete in sports. We compete in the private sector. We compete among our colleagues in in academia. Competition is good if it is for good purposes. Competition is good if there is a fair playing field, if there isn't discrimination, which we've talked about some here, and I certainly talked about in the conversation with the AAPI colleagues, and something we're challenged with in our own country. But with China, and now with Russia, they're playing by different rules. And so we have to deal with that reality and increase our ability to align with others to make our purposeful vision achievable for our future. So yes, there are many, many, many trade-offs in that. You all have identified one right here today, which is that means researchers and scientists may not be able to have the back and forth collaboration and rich environment that they once had. And so how do we cabin that? How do we get the most that we can without undermining what we're trying to achieve and not having our secrets stolen from us, our ideas stolen from us and used for nefarious purposes? It's all hard. It's all hard. So that's why we need you all. I think Nate summed up this entire session perfectly, which is we cannot meet these challenges with any narrow group of people. We have to meet these challenges with all the talent and diversity that we have available to us, and then go get some of it that we don't yet have available to us. So please come be part of that effort. Meet that great challenge.
Well, thank you. Thank you for a really enriching discussion. Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary Sherman and Ambassador Fick, for engaging with our audience, with the students, and offering wise and thoughtful remarks. Thank you to our audience and those here and those online, and to the students for their thoughtful questions. And this concludes our event for today. Thank you very much.